Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my favorite books that feature either werewolves or shifters. Alright guys, I'm coming at you with another spooky season rec video. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite books that feature either werewolves or shifters. Now, the reason I separated the two is because a few of these books are Omegaverse, so they aren't necessarily werewolves. However, I am very new to Omegaverse. I am still kind of dipping my toes into that entire genre, so if you have any really good recs, please leave them in the comments below. But anyway, I have a lot of books I want to talk about. There are a few books that are actually on my TBR that I'll save for the end, just because I haven't read them yet, so I don't exactly have a rating, but they sound really good, so I just wanted to talk about them. But anyway, if you are unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about these books. Alright guys, so starting off with one of my absolute favorite werewolf series, we have Sanctum by Hannah McBride. This series deserves so much more love. I was completely addicted when I read this. I flew through all the audiobooks that were available. I still have to read the last book because at the time there was no audiobook, but oh my gosh, I will 100% reread this series soon because it's so good. If you are unfamiliar with the story, we are following Skye, and Skye and her mother belong to a very abusive werewolf pack, especially because they are omegas and they are seen as less than. So on Skye's 18th birthday, she has now come of age, and her mother decides she needs to get her out of this pack. So they end up running away to the Blackwater pack, and when they get there, it is like heaven for them. And Skye is quickly introduced to Remy, who will be the next alpha of the Blackwater pack, and they end up going to school together. It's like a werewolf school. It's very, very adorable, and it is their romance. But while all of this is going on, Skye's original pack is still trying to get her and her mother back by any means necessary. Now, this is considered YA, however, I will say some of the subject matter is very, very dark, so definitely check trigger warnings, but overall, I loved this series. It gave me like Twilight vibes, it was very fast-paced, and I just absolutely love the romance, so highly recommend. And next up, we have Matefinder by Leia Stone. This is the first book in a new adult werewolf series. So in this story, we are following Aurora, and at the start of this book, Aurora gets into a fatal car accident where she almost passes away. Luckily, Kai, the alpha of a werewolf pack, sees this accident happen and is able to transform Aurora into a werewolf before she passes. So when Aurora wakes up, she finds out that supernatural creatures are actually real, and she is a werewolf. And not just any werewolf, she's actually a mate finder. So in this world, werewolves are actually slowly going extinct because they cannot find their mates, and you have to find your mate in order to have werewolf children. So it is crucial that she has become this mate finder, and now all of these other werewolf packs are trying to find Aurora so she can help them find their mates. And it goes from there. There's also other supernatural creatures that are trying to get to Aurora, and overall, I thought this first book was okay. I think I ended up rating it around 3 stars. However, a lot of you have told me in the comments of a video where I talked about this to keep going, that it definitely gets better. And honestly, I had nothing against this book. I just wish the world was a little bit more fleshed out and we got a little bit more. So I think I will be continuing with this series. And if you read the series, let me know what you think. And next up is actually one of my favorite books of all time. We have Wolfsong by TJ Klune. I am obsessed with this book. The romance, the story, the emotions, it is just so unbelievably good. But this story is following Ox, and while Ox is growing up, he is told he is not going to get shit out of life, and he is just really trying to get by. He doesn't have many friends, but he is very close to his mom and his boss. So one day, I believe he's like 16 or 17 years old, he is walking home from the garage that he works at, and he sees this little boy named Joe, and Joe can't stop talking to Ox and tells him all about how he smells like sunshine and rainbows and candy canes, and Joe ends up taking Ox to his home where Ox meets the rest of Joe's family, only to discover it is actually a family of werewolves, and Joe is actually going to be the next alpha of the pack of werewolves. And not only that, Joe actually had not spoken for 2 years prior to seeing Ox. So Joe and Ox have this bond that is just so beautiful, and as they grow up, their friendship turns into more, and then tragedy strikes, and it ends up separating them, and it goes from there. And I love this series so much. I still have to finish it. I've only read the first 3 books, but I loved the first 3 that I read. This is a werewolf romance, and it's just, I love it. I love it so much. So highly recommend. Just have your tissues ready, because I cried a lot during this. And if you're looking for a lighter, more comical werewolf romance, we have Wolf Gone Wild. So this is the first book in the Stay a Spell series by Juliette. Unfortunately, I've only read 2 books in this series, but I definitely want to continue. But this story is following Mateo, and unfortunately, he has been unable to shift into his werewolf for the last 3 months. So he is just plagued by his werewolf's thoughts in his head, and he believes he is cursed. So he ends up seeking out Evie, who is a witch, for help. And although Evie and her coven normally don't work with werewolves because they're known to be very volatile, she agrees to try to help him, and it is their romance. And I just thought this was such a fun and enjoyable time. There's a lot of moments where Mateo is dealing with this wolf that is just saying the craziest things in his head. And overall, it was just a very fun read. And next up is one of the spicier books on this list. We have Baby and the Late Night Howlers. So this is actually an Omegaverse romance, and in this story we are following Baby. And Baby ends up discovering she is an Omega rather late in life, and then she realizes that she needs to find a pack to protect her before she goes into heat. So she ends up finding this motorcycle club and decides that that will be her pack, and it's essentially her being cared for by this motorcycle pack and them kind of trying to bond with her while there is another threat that is kind of encroaching on them. And it goes from there. So I will say I didn't rate this super high only because I had a lot of trouble distinguishing the different guys from each other. There is a lot of them, and I feel like they weren't fleshed out enough so that I knew who was who. But other than that, I did really enjoy the story, and I've been wanting to pick up the second book in the series because it follows the main character's friend, and I feel like I'm going to end up really enjoying that book. So if you're looking for a very spicy Omegaverse romance, check out Baby and the Late Night Howlers. And next up, we have Rabid by Ivy Asher and Raven Kennedy. This is another book that I feel deserves so much more hype. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but I really enjoyed it. So the story is following Seneca, and Seneca has been waiting her entire life to get her wolf and be able to shift. However, 3 years ago, a alpha werewolf ended up taking over her pack and has been trying to claim Seneca against her will ever since. So during the ceremony where Seneca is finally going to get her werewolf, she ends up getting it and then is immediately attacked by the alpha. This causes her and her wolf to go rabid, which essentially means they're not in sync. But because of this, she is now very volatile and is acting out and is cast out of her pack to this area that is supposed to be inhabited by these monstrous werewolves. And the story goes from there. Once again, I love this. It was a little bit darker than I was expecting, but overall, this was such a solid read, and I thoroughly enjoyed the romance. And next up is Stolen by Wolves. This is the first book in a Viking Omegaverse series. This is actually the second book. I cannot find my copy of the first book, but oh my gosh, this series felt tailor-made for me. I've only read the first book. However, if you enjoy The Last Kingdom on Netflix, it has all of those vibes. So this is set around the same time in Northumbria as The Last Kingdom, and our main character is Tamsin, and she is part of this very pious community, and they are trying to gather allies because they believe Vikings are going to attack. Well, it turns out Vikings do attack, but they come in the form of allies. So our main character believes that the people that they are letting cross into their kingdom are going to help them, and instead they end up ravaging this entire community and stealing Tamsin. And the story really goes from there. I do believe as you progress through the series that it does become wide shoes. However, the first book is not. The first book is just one romance. But overall, I cannot wait to continue this series. I have had friends that have read this that say the second and third book are even better than the first, and I'm so excited to get to them. And next up is Regally Bitten by Lexi C. Foss. This is one of the books in the Blood Alliance series, which is a series that is essentially what would happen if vampires and shifters took over the world and humans were seen as just prey or for breeding and were the lower class citizen. So in this book, it is a wide shoes, mostly werewolf romance. We are following Luna, who is the daughter of a high-up alpha and is being forced into an arranged marriage with Edon, who is another alpha of another pack. So she really does not want to do this, but while this is going on, Edon has just recently met a human who has been turned into a lichen or a werewolf who is named Silas. And now Silas is trying to prove himself. And while all this is going on, all three of them kind of form a relationship and are trying to get back at everyone who has doubted them or is trying to unalive them, essentially. And it goes from there. It is spicy, it is dark, it was such a good time. I love this series in general, but this was one of my favorite books in the series, so highly, highly recommend. And next up, we have Obsession, which is the first book in the Mate Game series. Now, this series actually features werewolves, also demigods, and vampires. However, the main character is a werewolf. So we are following Sunday, and Sunday was part of the very prestigious werewolf pack. However, she is unable to shift. So she is kind of seen as her family's disappointment, and on top of that, she actually rejected her fated mate. So she ends up being sent off to Ravencroft University, which is kind of like a paranormal university, where unfortunately, her fated or ex-fated mate also attends. So right away, he begins to bully her, and then there are also an interesting cast of characters that also become kind of infatuated with Sunday, and the story goes from there. So I've only read the first book. I definitely want to continue with this series, but it was so fun, so fast-paced. I definitely had favorites when it came to the different guys. It is who I choose. I don't know if I mentioned that, but Priest, by far, my favorite character so far. But overall, if you are looking for a unique, somewhat similar to the Zodiac Academy series, highly recommend checking this out. And the last two books I have not read yet, but I'm hoping to get to them soon. First up, we have The Hunt by Ivy Asher. This is a dark werewolf romance. I believe we are following Savvy, who ends up being betrayed by her werewolf pack, and her sister Harlow ends up being kidnapped. So Savvy is determined to save Harlow by any means necessary, and the story goes from there. So that is all I really know. I actually picked this up at a Polycon. I did hear the audiobook should be dropping soon, so I'm keeping my eye out for that. And as soon as that audiobook releases, I will be picking this up. And last up, we have A Curse of Blood and Wolves. And unfortunately, it is very hard to get a good plot synopsis of what this book is about without really going down into Goodreads, and I don't want the plot spoiled for me. But from what I've gathered, this is a steamy Red Riding Hood reimagining, and all the book actually tells me is we are following this girl who is in a forest where she feels eyes on her and she is intrigued, and it goes from there. But I will say this book is stunning. It is a Fairy Loot special edition, and I've had this book, I think, since May, so I definitely want to get to it soon. Alright guys, that is it for my werewolf and shifter romances. Please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of the books I mentioned, or if you have any really good werewolf or shifter book recs. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, Leslie, Kat, and Lotta. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!